Welcome to moving tables between file groups. When you've created multiple file groups within your SQL Server database, the next thing you're probably going to need to do after that is move a table into that file group. Now, the reason we might want to do that is to isolate a table's physical I/O from impacting other tables within the database. Now, there's two basic techniques that you can use to move a table into a new file group. The first one is to rebuild the clustered index of that table, telling SQL Server when you're rebuilding the clustered index to move it to the new file group. The second option is to create a new table and move all the data. Now, in either case, these are going to be very I/O intensive operations, causing lots and lots of workload on the disk, and realistically, there's going to be some downtime to the application involved. When we're rebuilding the clustered index, it's going to require that we drop the existing clustered index, which most of the time is going to require removing the primary key as well from the table, and then creating a new clustered index and putting that new clustered index on the new file group that we want to move the table to. Now, as I had mentioned, this is going to generate massive amounts of logical and physical I/O, especially if you have a very large table that you're working with. Now, a big downside to this is that all your clustered indexes have to be rebuilt twice. The reason for this is when you first remove the clustered index from the database table, that means that you're now turning your database table from a clustered index into a heap. Well, the way SQL Server manages relationships between clustered indexes and non-clustered indexes is by putting the clustering key within the non-clustered index. When we remove the clustered index from the table and turn the table into a heap, we can no longer use our clustering key to maintain that relationship. So because of that, we have to rebuild the non-clustered indexes, this time using the row ID as the relationship builder between the heap and the non-clustered indexes. Now, because we have to do all this data rebuilding, this is going to require that we have a lot of free space. Basically, you should assume you're going to need about twice as much space as the table and all the non-clustered indexes take up to do this operation, because of all this rebuilding that has to happen. Now, the upside to this is if you've got a lot of foreign keys in place, using this table as the child and other lookup tables as your parent within the relationship, those foreign keys are going to be able to remain intact, which is kind of nice. Now, the other option is to create a new table. Downside here, this requires creating a new table. Once you've created that new table, you're going to want to make sure that you take an exclusive lock on the old table while you're copying the data across. Typically, this is going to be done doing an insert into the new table, select star from old table with tab lock, which is going to take a lock on the entire table, preventing anybody else from using the table. Once the data copying is done, you'll then rename the tables and then have to add all the indexes and constraints back to the new table once you've dropped the old table. Just like the option of moving the clustered index, this does require about twice as much space as the actual table takes up because you do have to create an exact duplicate of that table while you're doing all this. Now again, in this particular technique, there's going to be a lot of downtime because you're going to have to lock that table for the entire duration of the operation. When rebuilding the clustered index, there's the possibility of not really having much application downtime because you can do the index rebuild operation as an online operation, assuming that you have SQL Server 2012 Enterprise Edition. So let's go ahead and look at a demonstration of how to actually move tables between file groups using the clustered index rebuild operation. As you can see, I've got the script pre-written so I don't have to type it out. It's a fairly simple script. We do an alter table for the dbo.databaselog table. We drop the constraint pk_databaselog_databaselog ID. And then we do an alter table for that table, adding the constraint with the same name, creating it as the primary key clustered, specifying the database log ID as the column we want to use, specifying no statistics recomputing, ignoring duplicate keys is turned off, row locks on, page locks are on, because those are the defaults that we had when we created the table. And instead of specifying a file group of primary, we simply specify a file group of sample group. That's the name of the file group that I've created for this database. If we look at the properties of the table right now, and we look at the storage properties, we'll see that the file group is currently located in the primary file group. When we go ahead and run this script, now it will run fairly quickly on the sample table, we'll now have moved the table into the sample group. So to be on the safe side, we're going to go ahead and refresh, look at the properties of the database log table, looking at the storage tab again, and we'll see that the file group is now the sample group. So we've moved the entire table from one file group to another. Now, if this table had any non-clustered indexes created on it, we'd need to move those as well to whatever file group we wanted to move them to. We could leave them on the primary file group, or we could move them to a new file group if we so desired. So in summary, while we do have two options, neither one of them is really a great option because they require a lot of additional space to actually make this operation work. On top of requiring a lot of space, a lot of I/O is going to be generated as well. And that's because we do have to physically read these tables and write them to their new locations. So this does definitely need to be done after hours whenever possible, and assume that it's going to be an offline operation